Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Iron Culture presented by Mass. The year is 2025, so I want to begin by wishing everyone a happy and joyous and very gainful new year. Helms, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, well, thank you for welcoming me. It is a pleasure. I am doing well this afternoon on a beautiful, bright summer Tuesday here in New Zealand. And yeah, I am excited about 2025. I think it's going to be a great year. I'm starting off on an optimistic foot, and I hope everyone else is. And if you are not, I would encourage you to step into that energy with Trexler and I, because that's the vibes we're bringing on this first live episode of 2025.
Yeah. And Helms, there's multiple reasons for my positive energy and optimism. Number one, I don't know if you can tell through the sweatshirt. I'm beefing up. Okay. I am attacking the weights, frankly, to an extent that isn't necessarily what you'd call intelligent, but certainly is enthusiastic. I mentioned this in a previous episode. I have unrestricted lifting for the first time in like probably 5 years for an issue that's been going for like 7 years. And I'm just having fun, man. I go into the gym and it's like a playground. I'm like a pig in the slop and I'm just playing for 2 hours. It's so much fun. And on top of that, Holmes, imagine the fortuitous energy of the universe that has put me in this position. I've been a postdoc at Duke for quite some time. I'm teaching in the spring. A very last minute, unexpected opportunity. I'm teaching a weight training course. So, I mean, the moment that I'm falling back in love with lifting, I am now evangelizing and preaching to a literal crowd. So, if you're one of the 7,000 students at Duke who needs an extra 1 hour credit, come check out Weight Training 113 because it's going to be going down. We're going to have a lot of fun. Helms, when's the last time you taught? Have you ever taught like in a classroom setting?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I taught from 2011 to 2012 at Bryan University, Sacramento,
Mm,
which was
yeah.
a vocational applied associates program in personal training. They also had one in court reporting and medical transcription, if I recall correctly.
Well, there you go.
Um, so yeah, I did. I taught there for a year and a half, and then while I was doing my master's of philosophy and then my PhD at AUT, I did marking and some. So sorry, marking is grading here in New Zealand. So I did grading for
Yeah.
a postgraduate
And I
course
have a
called
kitten, so
Enhancing
marking has a completely different context when
totally
you're,
different
yeah,
context.
raising a
Yes,
puppy or kitten. Yes. But go on.
correct. So yeah, I did grading and then some guest lectures for enhancing muscular performance that I was involved in, which is a pretty cool postgraduate course we have in our Masters of Sport, Exercise, and Health. And then I guest lecture every year for two different postgraduate and two different undergrad papers: athletic training, exercise training and prescription, sports nutrition, and nutrition for health and performance, and across our masters and our undergrad at AUT.
Good stuff,
Yeah.
man. Well, I tell you what, I haven't taught in many years. I think it's been, I was just, I was going back. I was like, I need to find an old syllabus because, I need to dig up some lesson plans and whatnot. And I found a document from 2015. I'm like, oh, this one's not too old. And then it dawned on me that was 10 years ago, man. So it's been a minute, but I'm getting back into lifting, getting back into teaching, and I feel like a brand new me. I feel like I'm 33, but this is making me feel like I'm 32 again. I'm just
Wow.
invigorated.
You're just a baby.
And I don't
Yeah.
look a day over
No,
40, people tell me.
you don't. No. I mean, you're a little pixelated, so I'll even give you 39.
Yeah,
So I have a question for you. I
sure.
remember, I want to know if I'm unique in this, but I don't think I am. When I was teaching at Bryan University, I was also on the tail end of my personal training career, so I still had some clients, and we had just picked up and hit full steam at 3D Muscle Journey. I had a full roster.
Yeah.
This was the right around the time 2011, I was coaching Matt Ogus for the first time. So we had kind of blown up. So I had a full roster of athletes for online coaching. I had about 10 hours per week of in-person personal training. I was doing 20 hours per week of in-person teaching of personal trainers. And get this, I was doing my master's degree online at California University of Pennsylvania in exercise science while I was writing my proposal for my MPhil that I was going to do at AUT. And it was during my 2011 contest prep season.
Yeah.
It was by far the busiest I've ever been. I had about 2 hours of not doing something per day that weren't sleep and weren't eating. But I made the most intellectual and conceptual and learning progress in that year and a half period that I had ever have since. And I think it was because I got to, in different contexts, take what I was studying, considering, thinking about, and then having to teach it to other people, and then apply it with some people who were, just trying to get the maximum return on investment, and other people who were wanting to compete in bodybuilding. And dude, I tell you what, an interesting thing about teaching at Bryan College, remember this is right after the financial recovery, after the crash. So I'm in my late 20s, and everyone who I'm teaching is in one of two categories. The just got out of high school, not sure that they want to go to proper normal college, 18, 19, 20-year-old who goes, you know what, let me do a personal trainer, but I want to do it right, and I want to do it well and make it a vocation. And then all the people who had typically blue-collar jobs who got laid off, but they were avid lifters, so in their 40s and 50s, and go, you know what, I need to get back into the job force. Let me do what I always loved now that I don't have the job that I did, and get into personal training. So I'm like the dead middle of their age, and I don't know how to relate to either one. And having to learn how to teach 18-year-olds as well as 45-year-olds as a 28-year-old, man, that challenged me so much. And I think it honestly is, not to sound arrogant, but if I am a good science communicator or a bad science communicator, I was infinitely worse than wherever I am now back then. And I think I am only here and primarily here because of that year and a half. And then everything else has been incremental progress after that.
You were functionally overreaching intellectually. There you go.
Absolutely.
All
But I
right,
don't know,
Helms.
just teaching, that was actually a question that I framed as just me
Oh,
talking about myself,
what was
which
the
I do
question?
a lot. The question was, have you found that teaching while you're also applying something and studying something is the best way to learn? I don't know if you found that to be the
Yeah, I
case.
think teaching is, generally speaking, like for me, has always been the style of learning that just sticks with me. So like
Yes.
when when I was getting ready for my comprehensive exams in exercise physiology as a master's student, I remember basically like writing a book, like that I never published, but I was like, well, if I could teach this stuff in a way that seems cool and fun and useful to me, then surely I'll understand it well enough to do well on these comprehensive exams. So yeah,
Yes.
I've always felt that if you just force yourself to teach it, you'll have to engage with it on a completely different level of understanding because you're not just trying to find the answer to a question, you're trying to create, you're trying to kind of nudge someone toward an understanding while anticipating the questions that arise from that. So you really are staying many, many, many steps deeper than just the superficial, do I know this well enough to kind of spit something back out. But yeah, so I'm stoked. And I think, my students in my weight training class are just going to be, I think it's just going to be the best possible time to do it when I'm just kind of having this love affair that I'm rekindling with lifting. It's going to be a lot of fun. But Helms,
That's awesome.
the show, I hate to say it, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about the listeners. And we got some
Oh,
questions coming in. And there's one that I think you are unfortunately, uniquely equipped to answer. We've got someone who is regrettably, unfortunately, dealing with a pinched nerve, a C7 neck injury leading to a pinched nerve. I know that you've been there with a neck nerve related injury, and they were saying that they have noticed a loss of strength in their tricep, which is certainly understandable. They're wondering if they continue to train their triceps at the same intensity, can they hope to maintain their muscle? And I would just kind of add on there, just as someone who has gone through a lifting related kind of neck nerve pinchy type injury, as someone who has gone through that, has had their training impacted by that, and who has come out the other side, what kind of advice would you give to someone in that type of situation? Big caveat, asterisk, uh, all sorts of footnotes. Obviously, every situation is going to be individualized, and you should probably consult with a healthcare professional or clinician before you start applying what some idiot says on YouTube. But anyway, idiot on YouTube, go ahead.
No problem. So what this idiot on YouTube would recommend, philosophically, big picture, is to really try to shift your focus on what you can do away from what you can't do. That is the cheat code towards not getting sucked into a spiral related to an injury. Um, Now, you and I, Trex, have both had times where that is a very, very narrow number of things,
Yeah.
and it's almost unavoidable. And I don't want to make it sound like you just have the choice to be happy and to just shift your perspective and everything will be great. But ultimately, not only from a mental health perspective that enables you to not get depressed, that you actually can do the things you can do, but also from a very pragmatic perspective, um, I think let's assume that there is a pinched nerve that is actually preventing the recruitment of muscle fibers. Um, doing the training that you can do and even getting partial recruitment is going to be better than the training you can't do. On top of that, there are some other potential things that you can do. If you're limited to low loads, and if you were trying to get a little more stimulus out of this kind of guaranteed suboptimal training, you can do some BFR work on your triceps, which I think would be almost a nice way to avoid realizing that you're weaker too, because you're going to purposely use low loads. You can also do some stretching. At least the long head of the triceps, you have the opportunity to stretch because it's biarticular. You can get yourself into flexion and extension. Actually, that would be flexion, excuse me, of the shoulder and the elbow. And then you can actually put a stretch on the tricep and hold it for a long period and really push it and be a little bit uncomfortable. And that should really help to preserve at least the size of the long head of the tricep. Because you can grow from passive stretching alone without an active contraction, which is some pretty cool outcomes from the recent research and indirect implications of that, the stuff by Warneke. And I'm not recommending this, but I will say, and I have said it on the podcast previously, that I did do electrostim when I had my neck injury on my arms. And basically anything that I was trying to figure out, okay, where is my nerve entrapped? What does that innervate? Those muscles I am going to do electrostim on because I'm going to jump the circuit. I don't like the idea of me actually training and then other muscles compensating. I didn't see any noticeable atrophy. I did a lot of training. I do a lot of crazy shit. I'm not even sure that I was actually getting inhibition or true inability to innervate things. Again, this is an idiot on the internet talking at this point. You should speak to a physical therapist about this is my recommendation. But big picture, this will probably clear up. It may not. It could turn into
It's 50,
one of the
50, right?
experiences.
It either will or will not. I think that's how
Yes, if we
probability
view it
works.
from that perspective, yeah. I will say that most minor nerve things that come from lifting seem to resolve on their own. And that's good news. This may not. I'm not saying it will. This does not constitute medical advice. So in the interim, focus on what you can do. And then once it does resolve, if there's a disparity between what you want to do, or if you want to go back to what you previously did and what you are able to do currently, just make sure that you bridge back to that. And we have some great mass content on how to kind of make that come back slowly. And some of that's actually free content. I think if you go to Mass Research Review or some of our old stuff, I think Dr. Zerdos has a returning from a layoff article that I think it was also posted to Stronger by Science back in the day. So you can Google those things. And also on 3D Muscle Journey, our YouTube channel, we have a video from Dr. Nick Licamelli, DPT. So like an actual not idiot on the YouTubes. The YouTube series that's totally free to watch on how to make a comeback from injury or post-COVID, which was the context at the time to get back into lifting.
All right, that's good stuff. Yeah, and my 50-50 joke, certainly not to make light over the frustration that comes with a nerve entrapment. As listeners may know, Helms, you alluded to the fact that a lot of, nerve-related kind of minor entrapments do tend to resolve fairly spontaneously given enough time. And that was, I believe, the case with yours. Mine persisted for 7 years, and basically, and it's interesting though, because you might hear that and say like, so yours didn't. And what's interesting is that every element of it did except for one piece. And it was the one piece that was literally impossible to push through. Like you think about trying to lift through extremely painful spasms of abdominal musculature, like deep abdominal musculature. It was you couldn't do it. It was insane. And so basically, yeah, if not for that one symptom, every other symptom of it had dissipated, except for that. And so obviously I went through with surgery to just cut out that muscle because I was like, I'm sick of this. And once that was gone, it's good to go. So yeah, like if I had a more simple entrapment situation, then it probably, like I said, would have resolved quite well if not for those muscle spasms. So all of that is to say,
So
keep your chin up and, hope for the
yep.
best.
So Trex, you've actually undergone synergist ablation now. You're one of the few humans.
Yeah. It is I'm willing to take that on for the exercise science research world. The N equals 1 truly in the world guinea pig for this. And so far, so good, I got to say.
Maybe it's making some other abdominal muscle even more muscular and you don't even know it.
Yeah, check back in. Keep an eye on this. We'll do some after I do a nice cut after my beefy phase here. We'll see how the abs are looking, and it could be a new thing. This could be a trend that's starting. Going under the knife for absolutely no reason to have slightly better abs. All right, Helms.
That's already a trend, bro.
Oh yeah, I guess that is a thing now. Okay, so yeah, you might.
That's just called liposuction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking of the people do the implants now, the
They
abdominal
do.
implants, which
They also do abdominal etching where they
yeah,
will actually, like cut along the lines of where it should be. There's all kinds of stuff.
yeah. You know what? I'm thinking small. Maybe I should have all that done and just be the complete package of surgical abdominal intervention.
You kind of missed your window because what you do is right when they're about to put you under, you go, while you're in there.
Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
surgeons love that, and health
Yeah.
insurance companies totally understand.
Yeah.
It's all good. All right, Helms. I have a question here, and I'm fighting the urge to say controversial things. So we'll see if I can
Mm,
suppress it adequately. But I want to get your take on it first.
okay.
Try to talk myself down. Think of all the colleagues I hurt when I stir up controversy.
Is this about length and partials?
No, it has nothing to
Oh,
do with
wow.
length and
Okay.
partials.
Amazing.
So the question is, how to keep progressing if I seem to stall on low volumes, less than 10 sets per week. But I hit recovery issues when I do more volume. So things like overlapping soreness, joint discomfort, psychological / motivation fatigue, etc. So what do you normally tell someone who's in that situation where they're on a fair, 10 sets a week, I would say is a fairly low volume program, generally speaking.
Moderate?
Yeah, low to moderate, right? Certainly low for you. I mean, you're out there doing 75 a week, I hear. No, not 75, but you're up there. What are you at?
If we talk in total sets like of all training,
Yeah.
that's
No, I'm
probably
being
not enough.
hyperbolic, but I mean, you've pushed well above 30, right?
I wouldn't say well above.
Okay,
Like if it
above.
depends. It also depends on the counting method. If we're talking,
Oh boy, here we
hey,
go.
it's 2025, we're doing fractional set
Yeah,
counting.
fractional.
Shout out Pelland. I'm between 20 to 30.
Okay. Okay. So, person who says, I feel like I should be doing, you know, tapping into some higher volume to promote more gains, but every time I do it, I run into recovery issues, the ones that I just listed. What do you normally tell someone in that situation?
So there's actually multiple layers to this. Is one, we have to actually gauge whether we're really plateaued, because so many instances of plateaus are related to I'm not making the gains I would like to make rather than I'm truly plateaued. And this is a tough one because it's very perceptual. So the question of are you plateaued is relative to what type of rate of progress is realistic for you. Um, so as an example, I think based upon the recent cut that I'm nearly done with, that I might have put on maybe 2 to 3 pounds of muscle in a year and 2 months. If I was a novice or even an early stage intermediate, that is very poor gains. Okay. And I would suggest
I'm
that
making
I
that
must,
every week at the rate I'm going.
you're killing it.
Yeah.
You're killing it. Right.
Well, detrain for
I'm,
5 years, you'd be amazed what you can accomplish.
I'm looking forward to it. I can't
Yeah.
wait to see how much I can get back to where I was.
Yeah.
So, like in my first year and a half, 2 years of training, I probably legitimately put on like 20 pounds of lean body mass, right?
Yeah.
So this would be the equivalent of less than a third of the progress in one year that I should have made, right? No, because I'm not a novice. I'm not an intermediate. So this is excellent, fantastic gains, better gains than I made in the last 4 or 5 years in 1 year. So if you don't have that perspective accurate, then you're potentially just ramping up volume when everything's going great. And that's the problem. The other perspective is that, okay, there are two sides to this. There's the input and then there's the recovery. And I think the first thing I would recommend before you start to manipulate volume, and now we're assuming that you have accurately identified a plateau, is let's set the stage for really good recovery. Are you consuming a sufficient energy intake?
I should
Making
mention,
sure,
I don't mean to cut
yes,
you off here, but this is
go ahead.
important. This is one of those sneaky multiple comment questions.
Okay,
So the person said, I'm already sleeping 7 to 9 hours most nights, eating in
great,
a surplus, gaining half a pound a week, eating
great,
at least 1 gram per pound of protein, and
amazing,
minimal daily stress.
awesome. I would say, are you getting a serving of fruit and vegetables every day? I would say, are you making sure you're getting at least 3 servings of protein every day? Are you getting roughly on average 8,000 steps per day? And are you taking creatine? And then we'll okay, cool. If not, do all those things and see if anything gets a little bit better. But it sounds like they're getting the big rocks in place.
Yeah.
So the next thing I would do is then go, okay, we've got the recovery thing sorted. Let's take a look at the quality of the work that we're currently doing before we increase the volume. If you're handling 10 sets just fine, I would like to see how you do 10 sets that are a little bit closer to failure. I would like to see how you do 10 sets with really good exercise selection, thinking about force and resistance profiles, thinking about whether or not you're training at long muscle lengths. Also looking at whether you have some exercises in there that just are like hard to recover from. If your primary goal is hypertrophy, and I'm not saying squats and deadlifts, RDLs and bent over rows and bench press and overhead press aren't great movements. They're awesome. But they are not necessarily awesome when you're trying to do 20 sets with them. So when you go from 10 sets to 20 sets, perhaps you would want to choose exercises that are more machine-based, chest-supported rowing, isolation movements. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm doing 20 to 30 sets. I'm doing 20 sets of quads, 20 sets of glutes, 20 sets of hams, but I'm only doing 4 sets a week of RDL. Because if I was to do 8 sets a week, that would affect me more than doing, say, 16 sets of hamstring curls, right?
Yeah.
So I have one day where I do Smith machine back squats and one day where I do barbell RDLs. And I have another day where I do Smith machine good mornings and I have leg press. But everything else is coming from more machine based things. And I think a lot of the typical perceptions of people who can't handle higher volumes when they try to do it is because they're dumping on a lot of very, very challenging volumes. Um, and being in the powerlifting world was a really great experience for me because you see really quickly that you can only get so much out of heavy main lifts before you run into very clear bottlenecks. And then switching from being a power builder and not internet power builder, but literally competing in powerlifting and bodybuilding for my whole career to going pure bodybuilding and thinking about like, all right, well, what's just the best way to solve this problem? The amount I could handle was substantially more than I thought I could based upon doing kind of the primarily compound barbell uh, style minimalist kind of free weight bodybuilding approach.
Yeah. Okay. I think that that's a satisfactory answer. I think you brought up some very good points, and it gave me enough time to talk myself out of getting too controversial with my take here. But I think you boiled down some elements of what fed into my slightly controversial take on this topic when it comes my way. So, like, for example, I've had some clients who have mentioned things like this before. And, um, and as a coach, I'm in a position where they're genuinely and rightfully frustrated that they're not making the kind of gains they want to make. But they tell me I can't go a touch over, this in some cases even lower volume than this. And so I think one of the things that comes up is, and this is maybe a little controversial, but in a lot of cases, the folks who tell me I run into joint pain when I do more than 10 sets per week per muscle group, I'm like, this probably has to do with exercise selection and or exercise execution, right? Like,
Yep.
I do not believe from what I've observed in the literature that there's a meaningful large percentage of people out there that when doing an exercise that's appropriate for them and they're executing it well, when they go from 10 sets a week to 12 sets a week, all of a sudden they are prone to a dramatic change in how their joints feel, right? So I like to work with clients on that and say, okay, let's not make this a volume thing necessarily. Let's actually do a little mini experiment when we find an exercise that's much more agreeable for your joints, and makes sense based on your goals. And let's work up the volume on that. And it's kind of just a nice little way to dip your toes in the water and say, oh, okay, there's not kind of a threshold of volume necessarily. It's the cumulative beating upness of that joint, which is usually a function of exercise selection and exercise execution and volume to some extent, right? So that's the first thing. The other thing is, I have run into, and I just say this based on experience, I've run into many situations in the past where there is a bit of a psychological block at certain volume thresholds where people say, once I go beyond this particular threshold, everything falls off a cliff and I just completely tank in terms of recovery across many different domains or kind of indices of recovery. And so, for example, when folks talk about joint discomfort, obviously the responsible thing is to probe and figure out, well, what do you mean? What kind of exercises are you doing? Where are you experiencing discomfort? All that stuff. But like I said, usually that troubleshooting involves exercise selection and execution. When people tell me about soreness that kind of lingers and persists, I try to get clients open to the concept that maybe we don't wait to increase volume. We're not waiting for some clear indicator that we won't experience soreness before we increase the volume. We increase the volume and we adapt to it, and then we no longer feel that soreness, right? So like the repeated bout effect, a lot of times we like to oversimplify it and act like it happens during the first 14 days of your lifting career. Where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
because we're talking about 8, 12, 16 week studies where they say, oh yeah, people were really sore at the beginning and then they weren't so sore at the end. But the repeated bout effect is always this kind of shifting scale of like what kind of novel stimulus for you at this moment in time seems to really light you up in terms of soreness. And I have no doubt that people like I'm not trying to like gaslight people and say you don't feel extra sore when you go from 10 sets per week to 15%. But what I would encourage you to consider is the idea that maybe that's temporary, and maybe
Yep.
you find that you push through it, and that's no longer really a meaningful hurdle for you. So I guess kind of my slightly I never want to be the person who's on the internet telling you just do more
Just do more.
and deal with it. But I do like to encourage people to like thoughtfully consider, are there any possibilities that I am setting a limit on my recovery capacity that could be potentially a little bit off base. And so just for those particular components, the soreness element, I think you can troubleshoot. The joint discomfort element, depending on the circumstances, you can often troubleshoot. And then when it comes to things like, psychological motivation and things like that, we do have to consider the fact that we're operating under the understanding that things are going to get worse when you do more volume. So then when you do more volume, you have a tendency to see things getting worse, and to what extent that perception matches the reality is always going to vary from person to person and from situation to situation. So all that is to say, as someone is, as a coach, there's a couple ways you can go. One is I don't listen to my clients and I do tough love and I just, rely on survivorship bias. If you can survive my programs, they're going to work great for you. That's not a good way to coach. Uh, Another bad way to coach, in my opinion, is to take the customer's always right approach and just
Mm-hmm.
simply reinforce everything your client tells you and say, yeah, you're right. I did notice that every time you do 11 sets per week, your whole program falls apart, because that's probably not true, right?
Yep.
So I think a really good coach will find that middle ground where they say, let's explore each of these components of what we're considering an unfavorable outcome when volume gets higher. Let's try to create little experiments where we actually put those to the test and maybe break through some of those perceptions, maybe lift our ceiling for what we believe we can handle as a lifter. And let's kind of try to find some creative ways to circumvent some of these very specific types of hurdles that we're seeing. And we may just find that someone who felt they had a very low ceiling for volume, their ceiling for volume actually is substantially higher. And they may just find that in that process, they tap into a slightly higher level of gains than they've experienced in the recent past. So that's my very measured take, I think, of what could be considered slightly controversial if you just oversimplify it and say, just do more, you know?
You definitely didn't say that, and I
Yeah.
think the only person who would find it controversial would be like Mike Mentzer. Like, so
Yeah.
I think if you're dealing with people who, in my experience, almost always have great genetics, who are you know voraciously and with a zeal on thinking that you really only need an extremely low volume to progress, and anything after that is you're sandbagging or you're a unicorn. I don't think anything you said is controversial.
Yeah.
And actually, there's one there's a really good term that we use at 3DMJ when we're coaching about the movement side of it that you're talking about, which is just such a common issue, is what the guys call timeless form. Because there's so many ways we could operationalize and describe and look at an individual video and say, hey, you might want to try to do X, Y, and Z, and then we run the potential route of people going, hey, this whole technique thing that coaches do, that doesn't cause injury. But I think ask yourself this very holistically as a heuristic is the way I perform a given exercise, it's typically multi-joint, compound, free weight. Do I feel like I could increase volume on it and it would be a non-issue? And if the answer is no, then think about, okay, well, are there other exercises where I do feel like I could do it, and it would pretty much just result in more soreness, not necessarily joint pain. I wouldn't feel unsafe. I think a great example of this would be arched powerlifting max legal bench press versus a machine chest press.
Yeah.
When I try to do, and I've done it, daily, high volume, near to failure, heavy top set back off, 6 days a week, bench pressing, I get very predictable neck pains, neck strains, elbow pain, and wrist pain. And I can't even, I have to bench before I squat. It starts to mess up me up so bad.
Yeah.
But if you said, hey, life fitness chest press, which is actually pretty heavy loaded in the bottom
Yeah.
and gives me a ton of soreness, I could be like, I could probably do 40 sets a week. I would just be cripplingly sore all the time, but my shoulders, my neck would be okay,
Yeah.
So the goal is to get to timeless form on any and all exercises you can get to. And some lifts are just not going to agree with you in that way. And it's not that you can't do them, it's just that they shouldn't be the vehicles for high volume.
Yeah. That reminds me of one heuristic that I increasingly in my old age am really adamantly adhering to. And when I was younger, I didn't. Sometimes if you're a power lifter, right, you're doing squats, you're doing deadlifts, you're doing bench press, and you feel a little off. And not just like I can't find the bar path, I'm misgrooving, but like something's a little, that kind of hurts, you know? It's not catastrophic, but you're like, man, my elbow hurts, my wrist hurts, my
Mm-hmm.
shoulder hurts, whatever. If you're a power lifter, you're probably going to keep pushing through that. Like that's just the reality of powerlifting in most cases, in a lot of cases. And that's the nature of the sport. Like you want to hear, like, listen the next time you're at a conference, if you have the opportunity, when four powerlifters get up from a chair at the same time, just the groaning and grumbling, right? So like that's powerlifting. You're always playing a little bit hurt when
Mm-hmm.
you're really in the thick of your training. And I think one of the mistakes I made as someone who bounced around between powerlifting, bodybuilding, etc., was I started to apply that kind of mindset without really thinking about it to a lot of my accessory work. My new heuristic is if I'm doing an accessory exercise and I feel the slightest bit of discomfort, I'm gone. And I'm not saying I'm cutting the volume, but like, dude, if I'm doing a curl variation and I feel, I have a little bit of like tenosynovitis where my shoulder gets a little creaky when I'm doing certain curl variations. Dude, I can find 190 ways to do curls in a gym. If I'm doing a curl variation and I'm feeling a little bit in my elbow, my wrist, my shoulder, ditch it. Like, what are you doing? Your accessories should not be causing discomfort. And if they are, dude, you've been lifting long enough, or you've hired a coach, or whatever your case is, or you just heard this from me. Do something else. There's a lot of ways to flex, an arm to make your elbow go from a big angle to a small angle. So yeah, I definitely, when folks talk about kind of handling higher volumes and different exercises that cause pain, it's just one thing that increasingly I'm like militant about in my own training, and only it's been all upside. Like it's been
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't call it a game changer because it is kind of like a very obvious thing if you don't come from a powerlifting background, but for me, it's been a big deal.
There's a lot of people who get kind of either they do think they're sacred cows, or it's just they really like the things the way they are.
Yeah.
And I get that. Like, I'm supposed to do overhead press today. It's written on the piece of paper. It's really hard for me mentally because of my personality to not do overhead press today. And there are ways you can trick yourself to do that. Write down um, overhead press variation based upon pain, or overhead press, or dumbbell neutral grip press when I have shoulder pain. Like, make it the plan so you're not breaking the plan. Is my advice on how to get that, if that seems to be your barrier to implementing what you probably know is a good idea that Trex is saying anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and with a lot of my clients over the years who I know that they are a skilled, knowledgeable lifter, it's just baked into the plan. It's like, hey, when we're down on the fourth exercise of the day and it's an overhead press, you and I both know that that means something that involves pressing in a vertical plane or a somewhat vertical plane. Like, yeah, if it was barbell and you switched to dumbbell or you switched to Arnold presses or machine shoulder presses, honestly, a high incline press with dumbbells on a bench. We need to be pushing weight. We generally want to be pushing it upward. You know, that my clients over the years, a lot of them, we had that kind of working understanding, and it just adds flexibility to the program where you can get a great stimulus without kind of banging your head into the wall over and over. And it just means that the next time you're showing up for a push workout, you feel better and you perform better.
Mm-hmm.
So flexibility goes a really long way when it comes to lifting. All right. Speaking of flexibility, Helms, this is a segue. That's what we call it in the business. We had a question. Since nutrition supports the training that induces muscle growth, would higher quality food sources, complex carbs, healthy fats, etc., promote better gym performance and ultimately better hypertrophy? So this kind of gets into that idea of, flexible dieting versus potentially an approach to dieting that limits, quote unquote, junk foods and focuses all on quote unquote high quality food sources. So when someone comes to you with this general vibe where they say, like, I really feel like I need to go meal by meal and not just incorporate the nutrients I'm missing, but exclude the bad stuff. What kind of guidance do you normally give that person? Is there really much is there much meat on the bone there in terms of using food quality to promote a dramatic enough change in your gym performance that it's going to meaningfully impact muscle growth?
This is one of those times where you step away from the heuristic and you make sure the person understands what's really going on and what foods do for you. Heuristics are great. There are ways of thinking of things in a simplified way that doesn't require mechanistic understanding of stuff. But when someone takes it too far and they risk oversimplifying something to the point of making it not true, that's when you have to roll them back a little bit, explain the concept, and then reintegrate the heuristic with the background knowledge. So it actually functions as a heuristic. So the issue here is that there's a black and white understanding of good versus bad quality foods, and that they just do magical good things versus magical bad things, versus understanding what are the limits of what food can and can't do. So what is a higher quality carbohydrate? Okay, it's a complex carbohydrate. Okay, what is a complex carbohydrate? Oh, well, it's, it has the fiber component. It's not fully milled and grained like white bread or white rice. Okay, now why would white rice or white bread be poorer for performance? Oh, now I don't know. Well, it's not high quality. They go back to the top of the chain and they have to go back down. So this is where, okay, well, here's the deal. Your performance is going to be impacted by energy availability, mood, some psychological things, potentially hunger, carbohydrates impacting resistance training performance. If anything, it's going to be a volume thing. Mouth rinsing seems to do it, so you don't even have to ingest it if it's lower volume. So really, does the fiber content, the digestion time, and the glycemic index have an result in performance? Well, do you experience reactive hypoglycemia? I don't know. What is that? Okay, you would know. You're probably not experiencing that, right? So I think it comes down to, why do we see, first, what is the function of our macronutrients and how do they impact performance? And the big picture take home for carbohydrates is, if you were doing high volume, particularly high rep, relatively low rest interval, high density training that looks a little more like endurance training, lots of lower body compound lifts, it does seem, especially if you haven't eaten for a while, that a pre-workout meal might improve performance. Okay, we know that from a biased perspective on me, because I'm on the paper and it's my PhD student Andrew King's meta-analysis. So nepotism at its finest. Outside of those contexts, though, it's upper body workout, it's, you already had 2 meals in the day, it probably doesn't matter. Okay, so that's the context in which carbohydrate might matter. Good quality carbohydrates, that's largely a perspective from public health and nutrition, right? So you were potentially going to see relationships in the general population towards lower rates of obesity, general better health, and quality of life being better when you have people who eat less processed food and more unprocessed food and whole foods. But that's a very multifaceted reason for that, related to the fiber intake affecting health, the greater satiety, the micronutrient and phytonutrient content of the things that have those things, like fruits and vegetables. It's not specifically a mechanistic effect of the specific carbohydrate that was eaten at 10 a.m. It is the effect of an overall lifestyle, and potentially just the overall lifestyle that's associated with that type of diet and all the other things someone does, because this is largely epidemiological research.
Yeah.
So someone who is eating like that probably has a higher step count, probably doesn't smoke, probably doesn't drink, and you can control for those things statistically in an observational study. But I doubt you can fully account for them all, and the type of life that someone lives when they get 10,000 steps per day, 5 servings of fruit, 5 servings of vegetables, 30 grams plus of fiber per day, and doesn't smoke and drink, you know?
Yeah.
So that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, and I think it's really fascinating. You mentioned the kind of public health element, and when you think about public health guidance, and we'll just go with carbohydrate as an example. There's public health tends to focus on the extremes because folks on the extremes are the people who need the most guidance and support from a public health perspective, right? Public health is not the field of getting you jacked. It never has been, never would purport to be. So when we think about public health and who they're thinking about, they're thinking folks who run the risk of insufficient nutrient intakes, essentially bordering on malnutrition,
Mm-hmm.
inadequate nutrient intakes. So when they hear that you're eating, just a big old ball of sugar and you're on a diet that has limited, access to a diverse, rich number of nutrients, they're like, could you maybe find a way to work in a different carbohydrate source that brings in a variety of vitamins and minerals, right? So we can see where that we get this idea that there's good and bad carbs based on what they're bringing to the table in that context, and that's really not going to have in most cases a direct impact on performance or training adaptations. On the other end of the spectrum, I mentioned extremes. Obviously, in more affluent countries with high obesity rates, um, and that even the affluent tag there doesn't even really matter anymore. There's just a lot of countries with really high obesity rates. Then when they talk about carbohydrate intake, a major concern is glucose excursions because there's a lot of people who are either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And so I think that's largely where we get the general recommendation that a good carbohydrate is one that has fiber and this starchy kind of complex structure, and it breaks down more slowly, and glucose levels rise more slowly. The insulin response is much more gradual for that meal. So I think that is largely being biased by a general public health emphasis on minimizing the extreme glucose excursions when a pre-diabetic or diabetic person takes in a huge thing of sugar with no fight, just drinks like a liter of Coca-Cola and it's just sugar to the bloodstream, right? So it's really important to kind of look at how some of these things have made their way into the fitness world and really attack some of the underlying assumptions by contextualizing just where they came from in the first place. And I think bodybuilding is a fun place to look at that. I've grown to appreciate more. Like I got into lifting when I was like 12 years old, which was like early to mid 2000s, And if you look at the sport nutrition stuff from the, early mid 2000s into the 2010s, there was so much stuff in like bodybuilding magazines, which is what I came up on as a lifter, about, you need to make sure you're having these complex carbs at this time of the day. Then right after your workout, you need the fastest possible digesting carbohydrate. And we're going to hack into it and use these transporters and those transporters and this much sodium and make sure you're hydrated. All this like hyper nuanced
Jargo,
scientific approach.
waxy maize.
And what's really interesting about those types of things is you're like, are you using insulin as a like a lot of it came from honestly the non-drug tested bodybuilding world where a lot of those protocols really were made to very directly complement drug use. You know,
Mm-hmm.
massive amounts of carbohydrate to complement your insulin dose so that you don't go into a coma basically when you take this giant injection of insulin, right? Another good example, I think, my belief, which I could be wrong about, I'm not a historian, but this obsession in natural bodybuilding that's largely, I think, died away, but the idea of I need to shed a lot of water weight going into competition. A lot of that was water retention from PEDs, man. And it just became a
Oh
thing
yeah.
bodybuilders do, right? So it's interesting when in the natural, drug free, fitness oriented world, when we pull in these concepts from public health and we pull in these concepts that are purely meant to accommodate drug use, and we're like, I'm going to do all that stuff, and that's going to be how I define the quality of a carbohydrate, we start to make some decisions that are really untethered from the actual reasoning for why those things are done in other contexts. And, what's really funny to me is the people who I think are most effectively leveraging carbohydrate in a thoughtful way are the endurance athletes. And dude, they're eating sugar. It's got nothing to do with complexity. Like when it comes to like race day, like they're leveraging the type of carbohydrate they need at the time they need it. And if anything, they're trying to do everything they can to take up the most glucose into their blood per hour. Like you literally look at the papers, and it's like, well, what if we just put a little bit more fructose and dialed back the glucose just a tiny bit? And what if we had this much more sodium in this? So it's always contextual when it comes to what is a good carbohydrate. And the nice thing is that for hypertrophy, kind of everything's a good carbohydrate. Like you got to work pretty hard to make it a bad carbohydrate. But of course, if we're focused on general health and wellness, we want to make sure we have a well-rounded dietary pattern that you probably don't want to get all your carbohydrate from the extra sugar Fruit Loops.
Well said. And I think the bodybuilding world is even when you get outside of that realm of borrowing enhanced protocols, it's tough because it's seasonal, and there are, I mean, having coached bodybuilding and have been competing in 2007 when I was 24,
Yeah.
uh, and also competing last in 2023 when I was 41, there is changes. So like the off-season intake that I was consuming in 2007 when I was an in-person personal trainer and 24 years old, um, was a lot higher than my off-season intake now. And I also had, maybe you could argue it was a good thing, I had a much higher off-season body weight and body fat percentage, and maybe I was benefiting from that. But like right now, I'm probably 15 pounds over stage weight, Trex, and so the off-season behaviors for some people, especially if they have a high energy output, they have a high training volume, they're earlier in their bodybuilding career, they've got another 10, 15 pounds they can gain even as a natural perhaps. They're going to be a little more similar to what you might be advising to athletes generally, like eat more frequently. How do you get around satiety signals? You need to eat a little more dirty foods, get the minimum amount of fruit and vegetables, minimum amount of fiber. Like let's think about how to break these foods up and what is, like palatable, but also like an easy texture to get down because frick, it's hard to eat 4,000 calories or the equivalent for your body size.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, it's also, you're competing. All the body fat has to go. So your general lifestyle patterns, especially later in your career when you're not trying to grow all the time and you're in season and off season, kind of just like this homogenous lifestyle where the portion sizes go down, and then like your Greek yogurt changes from higher fat to lower fat, it starts to look like all of the anti-obesity health behaviors of get your step count in, like try to make sure that all of your carbohydrate sources are rich in fiber, are slow digesting, that all your protein sources are lean, that you have a nice meal rhythm, and all these things that basically help you habitually stay as lean as you can closer to your lower intervention point. So you'll get both and both are useful, but in different contexts for the same overarching goal of bodybuilding. But they're seasonal, they're phasic, and they're even dependent upon where you're at in your career. And I think that's hard to parse when that's just kind of coming in this general like body of literature, or that's the wrong, like, body of content. Once you decide I'm listening to bodybuilding information, like, because
Yeah.
some of it will conflict.
I'm glad that you mentioned lower intervention points because we actually have a few questions in the live chat about body weight regulation. Um,
Mm.
and I'm not sure the most tactful order to address these, so I'm just going to dive in and we will treat them as a kind of continuous discussion. So, one person
Perfect, because
asked,
after that I want to tackle a powerlifting question, so
yeah,
you can
yeah,
handle
go
these.
for it. So, one person asked if I'm paraphrasing because they're all kind of jumbled here, but they basically asked if gaining more muscle could cause your lower intervention point to go down. And for context, intervention point, quick history, people used to talk about body fat set points. People in the science world don't really talk about that much anymore because, frankly, the theory doesn't work out very well. Because if everyone had a very particular body fat set point that their body was absolutely committed to, yeah, it would be hard to get super lean, but also it should be hard to gain a bunch of fat over time. And look at all the charts. People are gaining weight. They're not defending a stable body weight through adulthood. So that's an oversimplification, but for many reasons, that theory's largely been abandoned, or I guess I wouldn't say abandoned, but improved upon. Right now, the best theory going, in my opinion, which I attribute to John Speakman, to the best of my knowledge, is the dual intervention point theory, which is, from an evolutionary perspective, probably threatens our fitness as a species, getting into the evolutionary term fitness. If we are able to just rapidly and without limit gain a ton of weight, or if we can very easily just kind of waste away and starve very quickly. So the idea is, we've got this wiggle room between our upper and lower intervention point where just based on our activity, behavioral, and environmental factors, our weight can drift up and down within a workable range. But once we start getting below a lower intervention point, it gets tough. And this is where we start to see people who are like, hey, my testosterone's low, thyroid's low, energy expenditure's low, I'm hungry, I think about food 24 hours a day. We start to run into real resistance to weight loss. And the inverse is true at the upper intervention point where, Helms, I've been there. I mean, you've probably been there at some point in your career. You are literally trying to bulk as hard as you can, and you're like, I don't know what I could do to gain another 5 pounds. Like I've hit a brick wall. Okay, so now we're talking about this kind of envelope of values, this upper to lower limit. And so when someone asks, can gaining more muscle reduce kind of the body fat the body fat level at which you hit your lower intervention point, I think it actually, I mean, I'm not aware of any research directly indicating that. If it existed, I think I'd know about it. But it does allude to another question that we got in the live chat, which is basically, what do you think about the gravitostat theory? And I
Can I
think,
ask you a question?
sure,
Do you think your lower intervention point would be tied to your fat mass or your body fat percentage,
or your body weight.
where it's the gravitostat comes in?
Yeah, it's hard to say because
I don't
uh,
think it's body weight, because we would eventually see IFBB pros just walking around shredded all the time.
yes, but also I'm not sure IFBB Pro should be used to test any physiological theory, right? I mean, at a certain point, like you're not really demonstrating bona fide human physiology anymore. You know what I'm saying?
It's slightly altered. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. But anyway, you'll see different people talk about it different ways. I'd have to go back and check the axes. I think the Speakman article on dual intervention point theory, I don't remember what it commits to on the y-axis. Do you?
I think it's body weight. I think it's listed as body weight. You know what? Why are we acting like we can't just pull up
You know what?
2011
Yeah,
intervention
it's
models?
body weight or fatness.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
doesn't commit.
exactly.
Smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a good question, is because yeah, you ask me which is it, and I say sure. Um, so it could be fat mass, it could be relative body fat percentage. Um, the reason that weight, it probably sounds counterintuitive for that to be on the table, but the reason that you could argue it's on the table is because of this gravitostat theory.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
gravitostat research is, I file it away under someone basically just asked generally, what do you think about it? I think it's cool. I think it's interesting. I think it's compelling. I would enjoy living in a world where it had serious explanatory power. Do I live in that world? I genuinely don't know. Uh, I'm
Yeah.
not totally sure, but there have been some very interesting studies, largely, if not exclusively, in mice and other rodents, where they've basically gone in and said, like, what if we had some kind of way to sense just our weight? And I think the going theory is that sensation or the sensors are probably related to bone specifically rather than like any kind of muscular sensing of the force of gravity. But the idea is, what if our bones had some kind of little sensor in there where they could tell how much gravity's working on us, how much we weigh? And what if that actually played an important role in our body weight regulation, our passive body weight regulation, in the sense that perhaps it has, for example, a major impact on our appetite? When our bones sense that we are weighing more, we have less propensity to overeat and maybe our appetite goes down. Maybe when our bones sense, hey, you're way lighter than you used to be, uh, maybe we have a stimulatory effect on our appetite. And there has been some really fascinating, compelling work in mice, weird stuff where they just say, like, hey, let's throw a bunch of tiny weights, like I think sometimes in this mouse, like implanted under the
Yep.
skin. And let's just make you weigh more without really altering any other element of your physiology. And there has been some evidence kind of lending some credence to this idea. I'm just not ready to go all in on it, particularly when it comes to making that jump to humans. But I will say, people have tried it. People have done cool little things. I think James
Weighted vest
Krieger
experiments.
and yeah,
Yep.
Eric Lee Salazar,
Hmm.
folks have done, have played with it, which honestly, I'm into that. Like, if
Yes.
you're looking at some experimental stuff and you're like, you know what, this isn't really feasible. Like, this isn't like a public health intervention that's ever going to stick. But like, I'm willing to try it, and I think it's cool. I'm all for that. And so basically, there have been folks who, throughout the course of their contest prep for bodybuilding, for example, every time they lose another 5 pounds, they're wearing a weighted vest, literally like every waking moment of the day. And I think sometimes even sleeping in it. But the idea is they are just replacing the weight as they lose it. So if there is these little tiny gravity sensors in their bones are none the wiser that they are getting dramatically leaner and weighing less because they're replacing it, trying to keep their step count up so that they're getting that movement in as well. Um, and the folks that I've talked to that have done it report that it's pretty cool and that they feel like it was a very worthwhile thing. But it's only feasible for like the only person I know who's done it uh, works at a gym, and I'm pretty sure it's their gym. So like it's not like they're going into sell car insurance at a 9 to 5 and they're wearing a weighted vest 23 and a half hours a day. So for a lot of people, are like, I don't think I can do this. I can't pull this off. Um,
Steve Hall tried it.
yeah,
Um, and he did not like it.
he didn't
It
like
was a
it.
huge pain in the ass, and you get this. Imagine when you get the fatigue and the heavy legs, and you have to wear 20-pound weighted vest.
Yeah,
I played with it a little bit, like just on my steps. I was wearing a weighted vest, and it it's not a passive protocol,
yeah,
despite what it might seem like.
yeah. Especially when you think of like as Helms, you've been there, I've been there. When you get deep in the depths of prep, and like I don't think people necessarily have an appreciation for like maintaining your posture and keeping your head and shoulders up at your desk actually becomes an
Mm,
effortful exercise. Like when
yes,
you're in the lowest lows of prep in terms of just
it's a
like your
lovely sport.
physiology. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's terrific. You say, I'm in the shape of my life as you can barely sit at a table.
Yep.
Um, and your doctors reads your blood work and says, "What happened to you?" Um, yeah, but no. So I know that Eric Salazar was he felt that it was, if you can get past the practical elements of how tedious it is and how unpleasant it is, he felt that he, for whatever reason, circumvented some of the downsides that we associate
Yeah.
with metabolic adaptation and some of the physiological downsides late in prep. But yeah, I'm just not ready to go there. I think I will always entertain that type of theory when there is a solid basis for it. There is a basis, but is it ready for prime time yet? I'm not. I haven't seen applicable enough human data to really make that jump. So all of that is to say, bringing it back to the original question, gaining muscle, is it necessarily going to reduce my lower intervention point? May the gravitostat theory have something to do with that? You could put me down for a maybe. I think building a bunch of muscle, could it generally be part of a cluster of things that helps you maintain a lower body fat in a more passive way? Yes. That doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to, shift your lower intervention point. So, for example, what goes into you getting leaner? Or I'm sorry, getting more muscular? For some folks, that means you're spending more time in the gym working out. You're building muscle, which means not only are you getting that tiny, 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 tiny bump in total daily energy expenditure from your resting energy expenditure, but also during ambulation, you're moving around a larger body with more active muscle tissue. So there is a kind of lesser talked about component of that as well. Um, you are generally living a more active lifestyle, probably eating more protein in pursuit of that goal. A lot of people, when they start pursuing a more muscular physique and they aren't like dreamer bulking intentionally, some of them do find that they have some passive fat loss and they achieve some recomposition in a fairly passive manner. I'm not ready to say that that necessarily has anything to do with their lower intervention point. It's also very possible that what we're seeing is a shift in a kind of cluster of behaviors that is just moving you closer to your lower intervention point without moving it.
Yep.
And I think that's probably, there was a third question. Um, as a previously obese person, is it physiologically plausible that my lower intervention point could be as high as 17 to 18% body fat? Um, Helms, do you have an opinion on that? Have you formed an opinion on what the human range of lower intervention points might be in terms of body fat percentage?
Yeah, I mean, there's a cluster of thoughts I have on this, and I'm also aware that I'm probably haven't intentionally stayed up to date on the research on this, but you can gain fat cells, and there is question as to whether or not you can lose it. I don't know that the number of fat cells you have is directly proportionate to where your lower intervention point is, or if it's just a modifying factor. Um, and people with obesity probably have gained more fat cells through that process than people who have not been previously obese. That may have driven up the lower intervention point, perhaps. Um, that is one part. The other part that I don't have solid data for, but it's just generally not how physiology operates, is that the model of the intervention point is there's this range where it is environmental, and then there's these points where it then becomes physiological.
Right.
I fucking guarantee you it's not the way it works, pardon my French. It's
Yeah.
it's actually going to
The
be
rare
like a
F
heat
bomb on the
map.
show.
We got to keep it spicy for the
Man,
people. Um,
controversy.
it I can't, there's almost nothing I can think of in the body that is actually thresholds.
Yeah.
It operates on feedback loops. So there's a gradient for everything. So I think if I was to try to point out what would the intervention model really look like in a more representative infographic, I would have those points, but I would go, okay, if physiology dominant is more red and environmental dominance more blue, it'd be like blue in the center band, and then it would be coming this gradient towards red,
Yeah.
and then it would be really red once you're over those 2 points. So there's an interaction effect there. And where you can hang out is basically to what degree of that red shift from blue is subsumed by your environmental, which includes literally everything besides just your physiology. It's your behavior, your food you eat, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very challenging question to answer empirically or anecdotally because of those interacting factors. But I think it is entirely plausible that in the modern environment, especially in someone who, like the people asking questions, these are dynamic people. They're trying to many times live a leaner lifestyle, and that involves behavior change that's going to occur over 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
The level of leanness that I am comfortable walking around now that feels like I am still above my lower intervention point is different than it was for me 10 years ago. But I might actually be. I haven't done a comprehensive panel to see if I'm actually at like functional low energy availability. Perhaps me walking around with abs and quad separation, which is not hard for me now, but I couldn't do 10 years ago, I'm actually a little bit suppressed. I might be. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I will acknowledge that an experience has radicalized me, Helms. When it comes to thinking about body weight regulation, there's no
The
way you know
medication
what
you
I'm going
took,
to say
right?
here. What did you
Yeah.
say?
The medication you took, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I must have said this too many times already. Okay, but Helms, I'm telling you that I was a person who, for my entire life, uh, as a teenager, as a 20 something, as a 30 something, I always was known among my peers as a person with a freakish ability to modify my weight however I felt like it, right? So, you want me to bulk up to 200? Sure. When I got to my lowest low, because I kind of over dieted for a show, after bulking up to about 200, I got into the low 130s. Like,
Wow.
it is not hard. For me, it
So
was
you have had an intentional 70-pound difference, basically.
absolutely for a person who's like
Yeah.
on a tall day 5'7". Like that's a
Yeah.
dramatic amount of weight for someone with my stature. And I took a medication. Weight gain through appetite elevation is a known side effect of it. Uh, I couldn't believe what was happening. Like I honestly got to the point where I was experiencing the type of things I'd only heard about before, where you step on a scale and you say, impossible, no way. Because I wasn't
Mm.
weighing myself frequently. So I stepped on it. That cannot be because I've not been eating in a way that feels different from what I usually do. Um, if I didn't know physiology, I absolutely guarantee I would have been the very cliche person who goes to a personal trainer and says, I don't know what it must be, a hormone thing. It must be my metabolism slowed down because I am not eating beyond the point of comfort. I'm not eating a dramatically different quality of food. I'm just eating the stuff I normally eat without weighing it or tracking it to just the comfort level I always eat at. And for the entirety of my adult life, I had a very tight range that my body would go to without fail, constantly. And it didn't matter if it was after I'd bulked up to 200, after I'd cut down to 133. If I just did my thing and ate what I eat the way I eat it, I would go boom right back to about 176. Like that was it. And experiencing that passive weight gain, driven purely by neural factors involved in weight regulation. I am highly of the belief that when I get a question about this as a formerly obese person, is it that my lower intervention point is blank? I think that I'm quite convinced that when we get into in 10 or 15 years, we're going to view obesity. We kind of already are, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be even more consensus that as much as the fat cell physiology is cool and interesting, as much as the endocrine physiology in the periphery is cool and interesting. I think we're going to very much come to the realization that body weight dysregulation is very, very dramatically, not singularly, but very much predominantly driven by neurophysiological factors. And that experience with that medication for me was mind blowing because I was literally feeling, almost verbalizing the types of things I hear that I've been hearing from people for 15 years. And I would always go, you don't know the science. Here's the science.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with your wacky hormones. And it was a really, I hated the experience. I did not like it. It was not fun. And you also kind of wonder, like, am I ever going to plateau? Or is this just up for, are we just going to the moon with it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Um, but I think it was a really eye-opening experience and one that, first of all, helped me build empathy, which I think is a good thing in the fitness space. Because let's be honest, a lot of people in the fitness space, even the ones who pretend they have terrible genetics, most of the
It's relative.
most of the folks I know, like who like have a fitness following who claim to have bad genetics, what they really mean is I'm only in the like 83rd percentile of best possible genetics for fitness. Like, right?
Yep.
I mean, come on.
Yes. 100%.
And even some of them, they're actually in like the 97th percentile, and they just don't. They refuse to acknowledge it because they think it discredits their efforts.
Yeah, and they compare themselves to their feed and their peers, right? So it's other popular influencers who are popular influencers because they look incredible,
Yeah.
competitive bodybuilders, elite powerlifters, like,
Yeah.
so yeah, like I totally know what you're saying. And I haven't had that same experience that you had. I haven't been on a medication that did that, but I did lose complete control over my ability to regulate my body weight after my first contest prep season. And the largest swing I've ever had in body weight is about 50 pounds, the heaviest I've been versus the lightest I've ever been.
Yeah.
And I put on those pounds in a period of 2.5 months after my first season, having been someone who never ever thought about food, was just a skinny dude.
Yeah.
And as I was a personal trainer at the time and thinking about the things that my clients had told me, I was like, oh, yeah, like what's to stop me from eating more if I don't ever get full and I like the taste of food? Why wouldn't I just keep eating more?
Yeah.
And even after the initial kind of like intense phase where you're eating to the point where you can't even sleep lying down,
Yeah.
I was still gaining weight. I like that happened around, I stopped, gaining weight around 190, 195 at that rapid rate. But then it just kept going just from just eating too much for another 20 pounds.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't know
yeah,
about you, but for me, there's the uncertainty, which is really, really,
same.
I don't think fear is the right word, but that uncertainty that does worry you about like,
Anxiety.
yeah, like you become anxious. Like, is this, are we going to the moon here or are we going to hit a plateau eventually?
When is
Like,
this going to stop?
yeah,
Yeah.
when is this going to stop? And will there be a rebound in the other direction back to normal where things kind of level out? Yeah, it could be a really jarring experience. And yeah, so like I said, it was, as much as I hated it, it was good for building empathy, but also I think it really broadened my understanding of weight regulation because as someone who always felt very much in control of their weight, up, down, wherever I wanted it to go, I think I developed a really biased fixation on the peripheral regulators of body weight. So I'm out here looking at circulating hormones. I'm looking at what's going on with the adipocyte and how do adipocytes change during loss versus rapid gain versus, reaching new weights you've never been to in terms of, extreme weight gain. And I think the neurophysiology part, we're really starting to find that that's really driving a lot of these pretty incredible results from the new wave of weight loss drugs.
Yep.
So yeah, it's all of that is to say, getting back to the question, when a person who's like, hey, I used to be obese, I'm worried that my lower intervention point might just be higher than normal. I think if there is anything in that realm where you are just kind of naturally wired to be at a higher body fat level, it probably is neurophysiological in nature. And I am really optimistic about where those medications go in the next 15 or 20 years for people who do experience that as their natural state rather than one that's induced by a medication like my situation. And I would also say this briefly, when I get that kind of question from people who say like, "Hey, I'm worried about how high my lower intervention point might be." As an academic, I'm intrigued by the upper lower intervention point theory, where they are, etc., what can potentially change them, all that. When I'm working as a practitioner or I'm dealing with my own physique goals, it is not necessarily a productive thing to think about. Like I know of no way to reliably change it, to the, because we don't really understand what sets it that well outside of what I just mentioned with, the neurophysiological extremes. So I don't really know how to change it beside what is just indicated as a weight loss intervention. Uh, and ultimately, the goal for someone who's trying to uh, change their body composition for health reasons, for self-esteem reasons, for physique reasons, whatever, if the goal is to reach a new sustainable body fat level, what we need to do is figure out where that's going to be. It's going to be a combination of your physiology, but also just what behaviors work for you, where can you feel comfortable. And so it's not super productive to think about, what if my neighbor's lower intervention point is 9% and mine is 14%. Frankly, it's not going to impact anything about the way we approach what we're trying to do for both of those people, you and your neighbor. What we're going to try to do is build the right habits, build the right dietary strategies, the right training programs. We're going to try to get you to a point where you are as lean as you want to be, where you feel comfortable and you have sustainable habits. So I usually try to say, hey, I know I've written articles about how cool the science is, but when it comes to the actual practical application of it, it's good for helping us understand the world around us. It's not a tool that influences our planning in any way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's all practical.
Yeah.
It comes down to, and like I was saying, it's a long-term development strategy too.
Yeah.
Changing behavior is the hardest thing, which is why obesity is such a challenging thing to weight loss is such a challenging thing to sustain, because it might be that, okay, your neighbor could on paper sustain 9% and feel fine, but maybe they were raised by two parents with obesity who had very low education around food, and that was their main coping strategy, and have passed that on. So they're walking around at 29%, and they have to work hard to hang around 19%, even though their lower intervention point's actually 9%.
Yeah.
While the neighbor has been, from the very beginning, developing an environment and habits, and maybe they also had parents who were formerly obese but lost weight, passed all this on, and in actuality, they can hang out at 17%, and then they work on their habits, and now they're hanging out at 14%. And it's not actually the person who you think is one way versus the other. So it's, you can't know what the combination of quote unquote nature or nurture is that leads to it. All you can do is develop habits that become more and more and more sustainable over time, and turn over a stone and go, that didn't work for me. Now let me try a lower meal frequency. This person might do higher. Oh, I really don't like this type of fruit and vegetable, or, step count is really hard for me as an office worker. Oh, I need to get one of these small foldable under the desk walking mats that I do while I take meetings. It's just this constant iterative process of figuring out what really works for me, and then where does it get me to. And it's just basically what works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me, my views on this have changed a lot over the last, I think I've been talking and writing about this for close to 12 years now. But nowadays, when people ask me, what's the most important thing I can do about metabolic adaptation during weight loss, I just say know about it. And that's it. Plan for it.
Yeah.
Account for it. But yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Like, what should I do with this concept of upper and lower intervention point? Understand it, use it to contextualize, when you run into some troubles or some struggles, why that might be. But at the end of the day, it is.
Yep.
And so we go up, over, around, and through it. as we kind of try to figure out, what the plan is. All right, Helms, you mentioned you had a question about powerlifting you wanted to hit, and that would probably do it for tonight. What do you think
Yeah, I
about
think we'll
that?
close it out there. We've
Yeah.
done a good job. We've covered a lot of fun
We've
things.
been
Yeah,
doing
I was
great.
mentioning.
There's been controversy. There's been
Mhm.
vulgarity, profanity.
Yes, I
Um,
did swear. I made this an explicit
I'm gonna
podcast.
have to
Whew.
actually hit a different button now when I upload this.
This is I'm making your job harder
Yep,
for no reason. It wasn't even something I needed to swear about. I was just feeling spicy.
it's okay.
Sorry. So yeah, earlier I mentioned singles on squats and back off works, and someone was like, "Hey, Eric, do you think the back off sets are doing much for strength gain, or is it really just the heavy singles?" The cool thing is we actually have a couple studies on this in powerlifters, and the answer is that they are probably doing a similar thing, and it comes down to the total volume of it. So, shout out to Dr. Pack as a part of his research on the minimum effective dose to enhance strength in powerlifters, competitive powerlifters. He did several studies where he compared a 2-3-1 singles protocol, so squat, bench, deadlift, SBD. So working up to 2 near max, so talking 9 to 10 RPE singles on the squat, 3 on bench, 1 on deadlift, to doing that plus back offs or plus AMRAPs. And when you look collectively at that data, you do see meaningfully better gains in all 3 lifts, as well as total, which is obvious because you add them together, um, doing the additional work compared to doing only the singles. But I think the reason why I say it depends upon the total volume is the most striking findings were in the deadlift. So people did make gains just doing 2 singles on squats and 3 singles on bench press in the squat and deadlift. But when you look at the Bayesian analysis and compared to the rope, which is just basically, hey, we decided this is what we call good, meaningful gains. The deadlift was the one that was the furthest away from it and the least consistent findings. And then when you just look at the raw change, like did these powerlifters over 6 weeks increase their deadlift directionally? It was like dead middle. So that means half the powerlifters were basically gaining nothing or losing a little bit of deadlift, and some were gaining a little bit. And that's because literally all they did was once a week come in and do a deadlift. One. So adding back offs essentially tripled their volume. They went from 1 to 3 total sets. However, doing it with squats, they went from 2 to 6 total sets. And doing it for bench, they went from 3 to 9. And when we kind of triangulate this with the data from Pelland, the strength volume relationship, those diminishing returns diminish way earlier. And it's somewhere right around 5 fractional or highly specific sets where you aren't clearly getting a benefit from additional volume, at least in the short term time frame that is most resistance training studies and in this mixed group of untrained and trained participants. Probably different for powerlifters. So the answer is that if you're doing, let's say, 5 singles a week on a lift and they're really heavy, I wouldn't think the back off sets were going to do much. But if you're just doing 2 singles a week or 3 singles a week or 1 single a week, especially, the data would indicate, even in trained powerlifters, that yeah, they will make a big difference just because the volume is so low. So yeah, that's the answer to that. And the reason why anecdotally, I think a lot of people don't notice a huge benefit from singles is they're typically doing more than 1 to 3 per week. You know,
Yeah.
they come in and they do 3 singles on a lift and then decide to do back off work. And then they do that 1 to 2 other times per week. And that's a very different animal than that MED protocol that Dr. Pack did.
Yeah. All right, man. Good stuff. Well, I think that does it for this episode. But before we leave, I do want to mention that I didn't really do my job in the self promotion category for this
In
episode.
fact, we both did a bad job because you specifically asked me a question about, hey, when an advanced lifter plateaus, what should they do? And I literally, that was the cover story for the January issue of Mass.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You name dropped 3DMJ about 11 different times, so we will be sending them an invoice. Um, so let
I
them
did
know.
cross promotion, but not
Yeah,
actual
you did cross
the
promotion.
sponsored. Yeah.
But this whole thing we do here, it's called Iron Culture, presented by Mass. So if you want to support the whole operation here, the best way to do that is checking out the Mass Research Review. You can learn more at massresearchreview.com. If you're into the science of fitness and lifting and nutrition and all things under that umbrella, we do our very best to provide the top level content every single month, reviewing the newest studies and, sometimes writing more practical articles that are kind of a synthesis of hot topics and ideas that you can incorporate right into your training and diet today. So if you take your training or your nutrition really seriously, or if you help clients and you want to, continue your education, become a potentially better coach with a more broad and comprehensive toolkit as a coach, we really do try to make sure that we are hitting all the highlights and bringing the best content we possibly can every single month, the first of the month. And frankly, to be honest, we usually release every issue a day early. Never been late, Helms. That's
Never.
what going on an 8-year streak. Never been
Since
late.
2017, baby.
So, check out the Mass Research Review, massresearchreview.com. Also, if you can't catch us live, when we do live episodes, they're at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday nights. If you can't catch us live because you've made mistakes and bad decisions and you live in the wrong time zones or you have other obligations, what you can do is go to massresearchreview.com/office hours with a hyphen in between them. And you can just drop us questions. Office hours in a university setting is, the professor's got the door open. Dr. Trexler running the old resistance training course. Doors open. Come on in with a question whenever it suits you. So that's kind of what our little after hours drop box is. Just leave a question in there, and we love to address them on the show as well. I just saw a question in the live chat. I have to address it. Speaking of self-promotion, when is the stats book coming out? I have some good news. So I understood that treating it as a book project meant it would never get done. It just wouldn't. So here's what we did. And if you're a Mass subscriber, if you're a member of the Mass community, you already know this. What we did was we cut it into two things. And of course, the Mass crew pitched in, provided thoughtful peer review and contributions. But basically, we cut it in half. The first half is the Mass guide to interpreting research. So it basically talks about all the stuff of interpreting research and applying findings that doesn't get deep into stats. The other half is the Mass Guide to Interpreting Statistics. That essentially is the stats book that I've been teasing basically since my 13th birthday on podcasts. So it is out. It is out there. So that came out the 1st of January, so about 5 or 6 days ago. So if you're a member of the Mass community, you have access to both. We are very proud of them over in the Mass world, and we think... my goal with that is if you get through that thing cover to cover, you will be in a really, really good spot, really well equipped to read research on your own and really critically review it as if you were peer reviewing for a journal. Obviously, as a peer reviewer, theoretically, those, peer review should be done by people who have hands-on expertise in the research methods that are being used in the study. Usually that's how that works. So technically with a peer review for a journal, you should have the level of expertise of are you sure you hit the knob on the right? Not that one, the red one. You should kind of have that familiarity with the methods and instrumentation. But I would hope and venture to say, I would wager that if you make it through the Mass, I say make it through as if it's a chore. It's a lovely light read. It's a page turner. The character arcs, the development is incredible. You won't be able to put it down. But if you work your way through the research interpretation guide and the stats interpretation guide, I almost promise you won't regret it, and that you'll feel much more equipped to, frankly, hone. Helms, you already made it a vulgar episode. Hone your bullshit meter when you're looking at a study or an article and you're like, I don't know about all that. The goal is to give you the tools so that you can really independently dive into it and kind of assess research or claims about research with a high level of confidence. All right, Helms. So yeah, massresearchreview.com. That is what makes this whole thing go around. Other ways you can support, of course, like, rate, subscribe, review, send links to people, spam links, get kicked out of forums and social media platforms just because you're sending links all over the place. But spread the word, because the more the merrier. We want to see a nice, lively, fun live chat. And before we leave for the night, I want to sincerely thank everyone who made it out to the live chat. You can join through either YouTube channel, the Iron Culture Podcast YouTube channel or the Mass Research Review YouTube channel. Live chats going in both. We address both of them. Thanks so much to everyone who joined us tonight. And that does it for us. So everyone, enjoy the outro music, and we will see you in 1 week.